when emotional states come up. So I want to talk about how actually quite the contrary is the case. We each have our own body systems and difficulties to adapt in our practice. So this varies with everyone. And this practice isn't like anything else. We call it practice because it's an ongoing approach to our way of life, our lifestyle, all of the conditions that we address and face in our life. In the practice, there's nothing to achieve, and there's no end point. No recital, no exam, no exhibition, no demonstration that you're preparing for, except every single moment of our lives. Beginning practice, we bring an idea that practice is some kind of magic, that it'll wipe out our suffering, or our confusion, or despair, or social difficulties, or disappointment in relationship, or heavy emotional states. We carry a naive mind into Zen practice, a mind that is idealistic and burdened with concepts. Though we're always experiencing directly, we tend to run everything through a narrative sieve that's created by our sensations, our emotions, our moods, our training, our practices, our habits, and it's felt in the body. So we don't notice necessarily our direct experience. So when we hear the instruction to look directly, it can be a little puzzling what that means. When we say look directly, we're saying just look at what is, just the zen of it, just just this. The first flush of relief comes with hearing the sanity of Buddha's teachings. I don't know if that's true for you, but that was true for me when I came to it. It was just like, oh, what a relief. This is the, I don't really understand what it's talking about, but I recognize something essentially very true, and something that I've been looking for, and I didn't even know I was looking for it. The teaching sounds so real. The accounts of people's practice sound so much like our own experience. We recognize something essential about ourselves that's not reflected necessarily anywhere else, except maybe in certain literature, or listening to music, or we're looking at art of some sort. But this recognizing something very true, very authentic, keeps us hooked long enough, even though we may not understand what's going on. We're hooked long enough to develop a practice, a habit of practice, a rhythm of practice. Bringing our own specific expectations for it along. When we think about what it includes, what it's about, we always are thinking about our own, bringing our own expectations and our own ideas, of course. And one of those is, if I just get it right, I'm not going to have these difficulties anymore. I'm not going to have these heavy feeling states or mind states to cope with any longer. This is often in the beginning, in the middle, and sometimes ongoingly. This practice of sitting and breathing and watching what appears in the mind seems too simplistic. So it may take a really long time to actually do that. Just sit and simply observe what's happening in the mind. And there are specific practices in addition to Zazen that we use. Precepts, which guide our behavioral choices. The 4 foundations of mindfulness, which I'm going to talk about again in a minute. And metta practice, loving kindness practice, to warm the heart. To be able to warm the heart and relax the heart. Some of these practices are more helpful than others. But over time, we integrate insight and we develop more skillful ways of coping with our thoughts and emotions. It doesn't appear that we can just stop. You know, one of the early instructions that I was given was stop your thinking, which was not very helpful because I didn't even know what that meant. It is very descriptive of what happens when finally attention is so focused that awareness really opens up. But before that happens, thinking is what the mind does all the time. Awareness is not just thinking. We all have awareness, but we may not notice it. That's why I say this is a case of mistaken identity. We have to see through for ourselves what that means. And we all seem to go through the similar stages in practice. This daily current of suffering and dissatisfaction that brings us to practice. This expectation of a quick fix, and thinking that all of the difficulties and the states of mind and all of that lie in the outer world, and that there's some ideal circumstance or some technique that I'm going to figure out, you know, lying out there. We do have a method of paying attention that's offered as a practice. But this is not, but living directly in the moment is not a technique. It's living, it's being alive. Experiencing continuing dissatisfaction with your life and your practice and your states of mind can be discouraging. And then you can come to doubt that this practice is for you, and that happens for some, and they leave it behind and look elsewhere or give up. And some come back and some don't. But this, to me, just says that when we are really discouraged and really aware of how discouraged we are, that we're really hitting the great body of the path. This discouragement, this me it's not doing it. I can't do this. I'm not successful at Zen. I'm a bad Zenny. Because the path, the easy fixes are not what any of us get in this practice. It's not an immediate solution. This is not a solution to suffering. But there's a slow lightening that happens with occasional bursts of pure light. And there are those occasionally. Some people have a lot of bursts. Some people don't have any bursts of light. Of, oh, I see, or just something that startles you. That's not a problem, because we each do our own practice, and it unfolds according to our own karma, our own way. So when you hear from your teacher, as I did for years, Chosen would say, just keep going. Awakening is not what you think. So, we can think of that as two ways. It's not what you're thinking. You're not going to find it through your thoughts. But it's also not what you expect. It's not according to some idea you have. Though we want to be free from our suffering states, we don't want to be disillusioned. And yet that's what this is all about. So this discouragement and disillusionment, they're states very close to each other. We want to be patient. Why isn't this working for me? When release from familiar suffering eludes us, we can doubt that we're cut out for this practice. This is doubt. This is skeptical doubt. This doubt is a sure ingredient of the way. Let's not be discouraged by it. When you're doubting, just be aware that, oh yeah, this is doubt. Oh, what is doubt? Where do I feel doubt? What am I saying to myself? Am I breathing when I'm in doubt? I mean, we work with it. Doubt, like any other state, any other experience, we look into it. But doubt is an ingredient of the way, and not to be discouraged by it, but include it in our understanding of the human condition. Colored by emotions that you experience. The idea is not to exclude any aspect of our experience, but to be a whole human being who's wise to what consciousness reveals to us, including our own mistaken ideas and beliefs that limit what we include as Zen. We come up against a lot of mistaken beliefs and ideas. So practice in this tradition is where ancient insights of the Buddha, who lived in an extremely different cultural time, and modern day psychology come together. The Buddha was one of the very early psychologists. But that's not the language that was used then. We're always working with whatever emotions come up. It's healing in its own way, but it is not therapy per se. Zen practice is not therapy per se. It's therapeutic. The therapy with a therapist can be really useful as an adjunct to Zen practice. And many of you probably are experiencing that at the moment or have variously. One of my earliest dear teachers, Robert Aiken, would always say it's extremely important to have therapy at some point in your practice life. But Zen is not the same thing. In our ordinary growing up, most of us experience cultural teachings and family patterns, family attitudes, and blinders, and body habits, and emotional wounding of some sort or other. Some of us much more, much deeper than others. And these formulate and limit our sense of who we are and how the world is. We bring our sense of this self and our habitual mind states to sit on the zafu in zazen. It's all right here. We bring it forward. It's in the body. Sadness, anxiety, distrust. We carry our wounds and sense of mistaken identity in our strategies, the strategies that we've developed along the way in order to survive and cope with the world and all of our situations. I mean, you think of a 6 and a 7 and an 8-year-old, really developing strategies, because you're blasted with the social world at that point. And the only strategies you've picked up are the ones you get in your family of origin, which can be problematic too. Or maybe not, maybe helpful. But we're often not even aware of how our strategies limit our perceptions. But they do become lit up as we go along in practice. And emotions are part of the light that catches our attention and leads us to inquire more deeply. If you're really happy and everything's going great, chances are you're not going to be stopping and wondering more thoroughly about anything. So our emotions run up against our expectations. Who we are, how the world is. Our practice gives us endless screens for projecting our limited view onto Zen practice, onto the teacher, onto the Sangha, and the self. Don't worry about sitting more comfortably, by the way. Make yourself comfortable. And these views that we bring onto the cushion are reinforced by a variety of inner voices that can become so loud as we sit doing nothing, which is one reason why so often we may have a habit of never sitting still and doing nothing. Because what happens is we get hit with all of these different voices. So if we come into life with disappointment or anxiety, distrust, sadness, we encounter these emotional states in practice. With the Sangha, with the teacher, with ourselves. Feelings are important and cannot be skipped over or believed just as they are, like that's the true situation. The feelings are a narrow slice of a flow of experience. They are the stuff of practice, not a failure of practice. What is the emotion? What is my attitude towards it? So it's not only what we experience, but what's our attitude toward our experience? When we see into how we've been creating and recreating situations that elicit heavy feeling states, there's a lot that falls away. You realize, oh, this is what I'm bringing forth into the world, and this is being met congruently. If you bring hostility into the world, you're going to meet a lot of hostility in the world, for instance. But think that our difficulties, our mind difficulties, are not easily done away with, and they're not seen into without continuing to go right into the center of any emotional experience. It's like going into a dark mine. In Zazen, we're mining our heart. We're mining our mind. We're noticing in the body and in feelings, the valence of feelings, the energy of the feeling, and the narratives and labels that run through feeling, through emotion. So relief from suffering happens not by bypassing this experience, or rising above it, or pretending not to feel, or falling back into the inner emotional stance. That just further separates us from the direct experience. Those positions all maintain the separation from the actual situation, which is flowing, which flows. Conditions are always changing. And it keeps us from seeing into the nature of whatever the emotion is, how it arises, what feeds it. We work with it by going directly into the experience and being right here all together in however the present moment is configured. Because if we try to skirt the rawness, the immediacy of the body, feelings, mind, and mind content, we're just continuing with our old strategies of coping and running the same old program that we have been running all along in our life. So now I wanted to turn to the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which many of you have heard me talk about a lot, that I think they are really reliable tools. It's a reliable tool to see into emotion. It's a skillful means and a help with habitual emotional traps, so that when emotion comes up, we are enlivened by it and informed by it, but not trapped by it. So the first of the 4 foundations of mindfulness is
Body.
Body as body. Looking into the direct experience in the body. Where is it? Where is it? You know, and if you have a chronic pain, this is so often an experience that people have, this chronic pain, neck, shoulder, mid-back, wherever. Very often when you, there's a connection between whatever the emotion is and that pain. So you're looking at all the sensations. The second foundation is feelings, meaning pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Not what emotion is it, but what is the valence? What's the emotional valence? And even in something like depression, which tends to be kind of steady state, it can be, if that's, you know, if you go around saying, oh, I'm a very depressed person, then when you look at the second foundation, you can think, well, there's something, it's unpleasant, but there's something kind of pleasant about it because it's so familiar. It's me, right? So it's not always just pleasant or unpleasant. And also this third, neutral. It's very interesting to look at, are you ever in an emotionally neutral place? And so, some of us are much more neutral than others, but check it out. And you can check this out any moment of the day. This is very potent. It's very interesting to work with this. The third one is consciousness or mind, the third foundation. So you look at what's the weather front, what's the general energy that's going on in your experience. Are you feeling expansive? Are you feeling constricted? Are you feeling rigid? Are you feeling kind of floppy? You know, what is the general tone and of the body energy? And I was talking with Koshin Kane earlier today. He said, yeah, think about it at a sesshin, at a retreat. You can really watch the weather come through. All you're doing day after day is you're just sitting there and breathing. And yet sometimes you're like, oh man, this is just groovy, you know, I just feel really happy and peaceful. And then other times you're just wrapped in distress about something and nothing has changed. It's the internal play. It's the presentation of mind. So that's the third foundation. Then the fourth is mental formations, which means forms in the mind. Anything you're aware of is a mental formation. It is thoughts, yes, plans, agendas, and all of that, but it's also sensation. Anything that you become aware of is a mental formation. And there are, in the oldest lists in the Buddhist tradition, there are 51 different mental formations, including will and I don't remember the list, but I was stunned when I saw that. And our mind contains a lot of forms and formulations. So looking directly into a feeling, though, doesn't mean wallowing in it. That's the starting point, wallowing. But we learn also to bring to this direct attention sympathetic witness. We bring sympathetic witness where we are wise to what makes up this emotion, no matter what the emotion. So think of how potent that can be if you have a tendency to land and get caught, trapped in inner critic. And you realize, whoa, what do I do if I bring sympathetic witness to this? It's a whole new ballgame. When we can bring it, we can realize, oh, this is inner critic. You may not know that you have an inner critic because you may be someone who carries the inner critic in a certain kind of tension or a certain energy in the body that doesn't necessarily have narrative to it, but it is rather hostile. There's a hostility carried in the body. So all of this is it's not cut and dry. You can use this as a tool and learn how to use it with your own internal experience. So it's important information. It's a bell ringing. It's what we always say about anger. We don't want to indulge anger. We don't want to throw it out and act from anger. But it is an important bell to listen to help us discern what's not quite right, what's not okay here. And that's true for all of our emotions. And they can be very habitual. So do I need to bring up a kind and encouraging inner voice to meet my inner critic's onslaught in this moment? That's something that we might realize when we really are paying attention to our emotion. Do I need to set a limit for someone else if I'm feeling resentful or imposed upon or victimized in this moment? That could be. You could get that insight from that. You realize, oh, I'm really resentful. Then that's a call to say, what's a skillful way to be informed by that? How do I need to act in relation to this particular experience? Do I need to resist my impulse to strike out and clarify what's off for me here in this situation, in this moment? Or do I need to practice loving kindness in this situation, in this moment? Do I need to join in with some kind of social action? Do I need to just listen and tolerate my discomfort? That's a tricky one. You really own that you're really uncomfortable and you don't want to feel that. So you can strike out at somebody or you can walk out or whatever, because you don't want to feel what's going on. Whatever the conditions are, when I'm wise to the nature of my emotions, they help me refrain from causing myself or others harm. Our practice helps us clear the way via emotion. They're a path to access, a still point that is always at the very heart of any moment, whether it's an emotion or maybe it's a wide open vista. We do come with practice to the stillness and peace. And where we're still caught in the body drama of emotions, we can't discern with a clear and undefended heart what's really going on now. So, what's going on in a situation, what's going on with my companions. This is where Sangha is a very demanding practice, because we're all here and supposedly committed to learning how to walk the talk, right? Learning how to bring any insights we have into being with each other in a way that is kind and skillful. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha are jewels. They're the three jewels. Not because it's a place where all our suffering and confusion doesn't happen. Rather, they are the conditions where it does happen. And a Sangha is where it brings all of this up we practice together, it all comes up. And our same old suffering emerges where we're all working on awakening to the consequences of our narrowed views and wounds. We're awakening to our inherited attitudes and our habits of avoidance and attraction. And we change our relationship to our emotions. And in this way, it changes how we experience our life. Less fear, that's for sure. We're not afraid of ourselves, we're not afraid of our mind. So the first noble truth, which is suffering and dissatisfaction, our own and the world's, we must know it through and through and not fear or try to bypass our grief, energy, confusion, desolation, but recognize all of it as part of what we are awakening to, so that we can bear tender, poignant witness to this very human condition that we share, and act from a wise and tender heart. This is our practice. And may we all take it up with gusto and be patient and steady in our practice, without expectation, but with our full heart. This is called the wholehearted way, because we're really dealing with what gets in the way of being wholehearted. And we're enjoying the fruits of wholeheartedness as we go along. If only just for moments. We do our best.
Please turn to page